Hey everyone, we've got 2 more minutes before we'll start, so I'll just get it slowly going. I have turned on the captions, so for any one of you who struggle with listening or maybe seeing, there's a better learning channel for you. The captions will be on the screen. I think you can also disable them on your side if you don't want to see them. Just a little bit of housekeeping. It is a webinar, it's not a meeting. So unfortunately, I can't hear or see you, which I don't necessarily like, but it is just a better version to work with larger groups. So you're very welcome. Thank you for joining our session. I do have other panelists as well. Candice, Renette, and Caroline is going to present some case studies. They will join us later. That's why you can see their windows. Also makes me feel a little bit less lonely. Just a little bit. We will be working through the session for an hour. Um, I will actually go through background material for the first 20 minutes. Kobe is also on the call. A lot of you would have seen her. She was between her and Vanessa is the work behind the event. So a lot of you have been in communication with her. So could be happy that you are here. The first 20 minutes, I'll just do some background. I think from what I can see on the call, a lot of you are familiar with our work, and then maybe there's a lot of you who aren't. So I'll just do a little bit of positioning and take you through our work in a nutshell. The next 20 minutes, I'm going to hand over to Candice, Caroline, and Renette. They're going to each share some personal stories or some case studies of how Century Intelligence has made a difference in their perspective, practices or applications. And then the last 15 to 20 minutes, we'll just do Q&A. The Q&A, you have to use the chat box for that, the Q&A box. So feel free to pop any one of your questions right throughout the session in the Q&A box. Both Candice and Caroline can also respond to those questions, or we will also keep the questions towards the end of the session if we wanted to go back to them at that particular stage. All right, so great. Glad that you are here. It is 1 minute after 6 o'clock, so we can just get going. And I'll take you through Century Intelligence, the science of human connection. It's interesting what is going on in the world of AI. I don't know, in the world or in the parts where I keep on listening to, it's amazing how much development and talk there is about artificial intelligence. And I think our work from a Century Intelligence point of view really, really takes it down to the human level. What does it really mean to be humans? Which I think is something that we need to hang on to it pretty tightly. All right, so let's just take you through this. Let's start here to start off with, and that's obviously a really nice image of the human brain. Have you ever felt capable but overwhelmed, or know what you need to do, but you didn't necessarily could access it? Or you've watched clients or your family or team members struggle despite the insights that they may have. And I think if we talk about that, these are problems that all of us encounter on a day-to-day basis. And it's not a motivation problem. It is a nervous system problem. And I think there's a lot of discussions around the nervous system, neuroscience, how does our brain support everything that we do on a day-to-day level? And that's really what we want to do today, is take you away from the very known concepts and start to look at your nervous system from a sensory perspective. So, what most models miss, they focus on mindset, behavior, or strategy, but underneath all of this is sensory processing. And I've particularly chosen that image because it displays the sense of touch and our skin and how do we connect with other people, which is so primal yet so important, because that is truly how we connect with other people in our world. It's one of the senses that we work with. So what is sensory intelligence? And I've put our logo up there. That logo represents our sensory tree. I'm not going to have time to go into the tree in a lot of detail, but it's a lovely analogy for people to associate their sensory thresholds, which we obtain through a sensory-based assessments. Are you a trunk, a root, or a leaf? Which becomes really great language to use, particularly from a relationship point of view. But sensory intelligence is the ability to measure, to understand, and to work with the way that the nervous system process sensory input. And if we understand that we can restore those human connections, how do we restore connection to ourselves, to others, and to the environment? And the environment is really critical in the work that we are doing, because we believe the environment is really pushing information through to the brain, and we do see environment as a therapeutic model. In other words, we can use the environment to change behavior outcomes. And if we can do that, we improve regulation. There's also a lot of talk around regulation, self-regulation. How do we actually control or manage our own nervous system and our own brains? And if we can do that, we can also manage our behavior and our performance. And this applies to adults, to professionals, and to workplaces, not just children. So sensory processing is very well known in the pediatric world, working with children, and particularly in the neurodiversity space. It's very well known. It has been around for decades, but it does apply to us as adults as well. And I mean, that has literally been my mission since 2000, literally, that's a long time ago, to shift something that has been so known with children and pediatrics, but also make it applicable to adolescents and adults. It does apply to us as well. So your seven senses, yes, you have seven senses, not just five, and they do shape our regulation and our performance. And this image is quite fundamental to the work that we do. You've got your seven senses, and they process information from the environment, and it enters the brain at the lower level of the brain, at the bottom bit. So it enters at the bottom before it's being shifted up into the rest of the brain, which impact the way that we work, the way that we live, and the way that we learn. So our senses are these constant conduits that take stimulation from the environment up through to the brain. It's a very complicated, complex neurological process, and I promise you I'm not going to bore you with that, but it is quite fundamental to how we operate as humans. So let's talk about the seven senses for those of you who are not familiar with them. Seeing and hearing, that's very common. All of us know what goes through the eyes, what goes through the ears. They are called our information senses. And everything that we learn, we act, we do, we think, our language is processing information from the ears and information from the eyes. And they are obviously usually overloaded. We're living in a very visually, auditory overloaded world, where we are being bombarded with information at any time, at any given day. So they are the two senses that works predominantly hard. And since I'm just playing this game with AI at the moment, and through our visual and our auditory systems, artificial intelligence, and the most ones that we use is really around our LLM systems, language systems, and language models. And that processing of our intelligence is really often being utilized by AI. But then we move to touch, smell, and taste. And they then become our social senses. They really help us to feel, to connect, to form relationships. And this is where it becomes very human. Touch is in our skin. We've got skin from the top of our head right down to the soles of our feet. We've got a really wide distribution area for touch. Whenever we're in a social environment, whenever we've got people around us, our skin gives us feedback of where does your body end and the world begin. So it's a really, really important sense to help us to bond and to form attachments with other people. We also know a small baby or children would bond with parents through the sense of touch, through hugging, through touching, and also by giving someone a deep hug. It's a way for us to show that we love them, that we appreciate them, and it's often also calming. So touch, and then smell. Smell goes through the nose. It is the preferential system of the brain, doesn't get filtered in Grand Central Station in the brain. So it's got a bit of a hotline to emotion and memory in the brain. So if we have a smell, it triggers emotion, it triggers a memory, which is the way that these pathways have been designed and intricately play and work together with taste. So touch, smell, and taste are our social senses, and they are often deprived because we don't use them as much. We're not as social as we are. There's a lot of loneliness in the world. We're not engaging as much as we should with other people. So these three senses are often very much deprived, and really important for us to engage and to connect with people and with ourselves in our day-to-day space. And then there's the other two senses, which is kind of two branches of one system that most of you will be unfamiliar with. They are the movement sense, and it comprises of two separate systems. One is your vestibular system. It's in your inner ear. It's like your body's GPS. It gives you feedback in space, where you are in space. How does your brain respond to that? What do you do with that? And that works in conjunction with proprioception. Proprioception is in your muscles and in your joints. Every time when you move a muscle or you move a joint, your brain gets movement feedback. And these systems are really, really important for regulation. They're for posture, for balance, anchoring us, but also helping us to maneuver from point A to point B. The movement system, very important because it is a primary regulation sense. We use it to focus, to de-stress, to self-regulate. And it is also a fairly deprived system because of the amount of seating that we are being exposed to. We sit an awful amount throughout the day, particularly those of you who work in more information type of work where you work a lot behind a desktop or a screen or a computer. The exercise industry has maxed this out. There's a lot of application being put into sport, going to the gym, doing regular exercise, because we know that it does provide regulatory patterns through to the brain. So very important for us to be more active, to stand up from our chairs, to move the body, to stretch, because it is a natural way for the brain to get self-regulated without really acquiring a lot of time or attention. These are our seven senses. They work consistently in the background without us being aware of that. So then also going back to the neuroscience a little bit, we've got a top part of the brain and a bottom part. The top part of the brain, conscious, controlled, calculated. The bottom part of the brain, unconscious, uncontrolled, intuitive. And again, they get stimulated by environmental stimuli. So information still enters at the bottom before it actually would get to the top of the brain. And I think important to remember the executive part of the brain, the top part of the brain, which is more conscious, controlled, and calculated, is what we use for reason, thinking, learning, and performing. But the bottom part of the brain, the more unconscious, uncontrolled, intuitive bit, is gut habits, preferences, and comfort levels. This hierarchy in the brain is really, really important to understand, because we cannot get to conscious cognition. In other words, we cannot get to thinking, reasoning, and performance before we haven't channeled these pathways through at the bottom. And the research are clear to show that the 80-20% principle also refers here. About 80% of brain activity and energy is allocated to the lower part of the brain, the unconscious, uncontrolled, intuitive part, because it helps us to make us feel safe. It is also our protective brain. And only about 20% is actually going into the executive brain for thinking, brain activity, and the learning bit. So the lower part of the brain plays a massive role in what we do and how do we operate. I'm sure if I ask you the question, when was the last time then you've done something or said something to realize a split second later on, oops, I shouldn't have done that. That is the working of your unconscious lower brain. It is primed to work fast and actually respond without thought process, because thought process only sits in the top part of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the cortex, and not in the lower part. So those stress, fight, flight responses are all located in the lower structure of the brain, which is so important to remember. And hence, sensory intelligence is understanding the lower part of the brain, EQ, emotional intelligence, the middle part of the brain, and IQ, the top part of the brain. So this regulation equation, I just want to highlight that to you, because this is really the crux of the work that we do. You've got sensory input from your environment, and then you've got nervous system processing, which get you into a regulated state for behavior and performance. If we can change the input, in other words, if we change the sensory element, we can actually shift the state. We can change the cognitive output. So the nervous system processing starts initially with the brain sensing what's going on, then feeling to help you to regulate, and then thinking for behavior and performance. And our work really focuses on this lower level. If we can understand the sensory input, the input section, how can we then influence a different output and a different cognitive element? Why does this matter for professionals? Those of you who want to use this in your respective work, because I think often what looks for us as resistance or anxiety or burnout or poor performance or even emotional reactivity could be associated with sensory overload or a sensory mismatch. That's very common. It happens. And if we can understand the initial channeling of where information feeds into the brain, how does that result in those behaviors, then we can change, obviously, that output and that result. So obviously, how do we do this? Assessment is important. So I've designed the sensory matrix, which is a self-assessment, and it's a structured way for us to measure and map out our sensory patterns. We've got 7 sensors. And are you more sensitive, low thresholds, or are you more seeking, high thresholds? And we've got varied and nuanced patterns of responses to sensory input based on our genetic wiring. We're just wired in this particular way. For instance, someone could have sensitivity for low thresholds for auditory, in other words, be more sensitive to sound, but I have a high threshold for movement, meaning my brain naturally seeks out movement in order to self-regulate. And if we do that, we can identify where's our distractions, how do we need to regulate best, and then we can build targeted strategies for our clients as a result. And I like that clarity replaces guesswork. I can't tell you how many times over the years people have been through this and then said intuitively, wow, I knew this about myself, but now only do I understand it, or now can I put it into the context. So we really work around people understanding their own sensory systems, understanding their sensory matrix. What are they mapping? What does it look like? Where are their triggers? How should they self-regulate? Which environments or sensations are not really good for them, which creates overload or a mismatch? And then we help them to align either our activities or our environments to align with that particular need. And I just couldn't help but do this. So I'm just going to throw a little bit of research out to you. I'm consistently still doing research, but we've looked at what are these threshold patterns within the samples that we've looked at. This is a sample of 4,523. I'm going to just give you the 2 on the right. So there was 2 samples that we did. We looked at healthy adults, and then we looked at people with mental health and neurodiversity. So the healthy adults was 1,741. 40% of that group had a neutral threshold. In other words, neither were they seeking or sensitive to sensory input. But 30% of people had low threshold, meaning their brains respond overly to that sensory input. They are hyper responding, and they get sensory overloaded and sensory over responding and sensory sensitive and avoiding. The other tail, the other 30% have got high thresholds. They seek out sensory stimulation, and their brains actually thrives on sensory input. And yeah, I think the low threshold group is a lot more prominent and well known, but oops, there I go. But both these 2 ends are really important to consider. Because as much as someone with low threshold can go into sensory overload and sensitivity, someone with high threshold could have a sensory mismatch and not need their sensory needs, which could also result in problematic behaviors. But what is interesting is the bottom diagram. 47% of the people in our mental health and neurodiverse group had low thresholds. In other words, more sensitive to sensory stimulation and more impacted by the environment, and therefore more prone for sensory overload and obviously a sensory mismatch. So what changes when we work sensory first? And this we get all the time. Clients feel understood. We unpack these behaviors and they always say, oh, I thought there was something wrong with me. Now I understand it's part of my wiring. Regulation improves faster. We help people to identify, I need to, for instance, switch off my notification on my phone, or I need to use a different lighting in my environment. There are so many practical applications and strategies that we provide to our clients. then these strategies then stick. If I know I need to turn off a notification on my phone because it annoys my brain because of the shrieking sound, it is something that really sticks. And then performance stabilizes because we're working with biology, not against it. We are really helping people to see where does your nervous system operate best and what do you need in order to be the best version of yourself. Okay. And this is how we work, 3 steps. So step one is understanding your sensory pattern. And we use the sensory matrix there. I've also designed some other assessments so that we can map out what does your sensory pattern entails, what threshold types do you have across your 7 systems, and then we apply structured tools. What are we going to do with this knowledge to help you manage and unpack and maximize your sensory patterns? There's no right or wrong here. That is literally what should I be doing for my body and my brain to maximize my day-to-day output. And then step 3 is self-mastery. What do we need to do? And something maybe that I can just share with you. I've got high thresholds, so I get very bored at home. And eventually now I've signed up for hybrid working spaces at Workshop 17, for those of you familiar with them. And it's really changed my life so far. And I can't believe I haven't done that sooner. So I've really also listened to my needs and how do I make adaptations so that I can actually work better and be healthier and be happier. So obviously what we're going to do, I'm going to give you 3 contexts where this transform outcomes. And I've asked 3 people who I'm familiar with and is very familiar with our work and obviously have been on the receiving end of this to share a little bit of their story. So firstly, Candace Mess is in clinical practice. She's an occupational therapist. I'm going to ask her to share one of her case studies. And Candice, when you're done, I'm just going to then hand over to Carlene Pretorius. Carlene will be talking about her own journey when she went through our practitioners training. And then Renette, thank you for being here. Renette is an actually old client of mine, and I've also worked with Renette with one of their teams. So I'm going to hand over to you guys to actually just provide us with your stories. Candice, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There was a question in the box on what our ideal client is, and I hope this gives you some insight into some of the clients we see, and then perhaps we can answer a bit further at the end. So the client that I'm going to be talking about today is a client that I met through an incapacity process. I was the case manager as well as the treating therapist for, well, we're going to call it Tela Tandi. Tandi was age 31. She worked at a very busy bank in South Africa. She had a previous admission to a psychiatric hospital. Following her admission, she then went on incapacity. After a functional capacity assessment, she then tried to return to work. However, she only could return to 70% capacity of her role, and she could not increase her capacity, and it was unknown to the employer as well as her team at that point why. They then referred her to our practice, and one of the main things that came out in our initial assessment was while she had severe mental health issues and lack of support and accommodations at her workplace, she also was very sensory sensitive. So after doing a sensory matrix profile with her, we were able to explain how her sensitivities impacted her productivity. She was sensitive to sound, touch, and taste. However, her visual and multisensory systems were actually high threshold or seeking. So she wanted more of those. The combination of these sometimes gave her a profile that people didn't understand, and this contributed to her lack of understanding at work. What we did is we had very specific interventions to help her implement a personalized sensory diet. So small things she could do every day within her workspace to help her learn how to self-regulate. We used this within her return to work program, and we then had a staggered return to work that she engaged in. Starting off initially at 70%, she then had a rotational basis throughout the banking environment. We also had individual therapy and coaching on various skills that she did, and always underpinning by her sensory. So whether it was a DBT skill we were using, we then related it back to, okay, how do we first regulate? What do we first need to do? How do you first need to see where you are? What do you need? For her, it really was a turnaround in her productivity. She was able to start plotting what her sensitivities were, where she needed to have more or where she needed to have less, and then also helping her self-regulate in these different circumstances. So they're not making it other people's priority, but helping her to self-prioritize. So the impact overall, and because we had an FCE and we could do a post assessment as well, she noted a 42% increase in overall emotional regulation. No scores fell within the risk range on any psychosocial measures that we had, and a 75% reduction of these was also then noted. She was then no longer at prolonged risk of disability. She reported no longer to feel overwhelmed at work. Her mood, she reported, was stable. And then we were able to transition her back to 100% capacity, resulting in the insurer as well as her treating team being able to step back. Obviously, this plays a great role for the insurer because they then no longer have to pay that benefit, but also for her independence, her self-worth, that through her own personal regulation and assertiveness, she could actually be successful in this role. So this is one case that we have used within our current environment. However, I'm looking at the chat, we do often see a variety of cases. And our next presenter is going to tell a bit more of a real life situation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Candice. That's really, really awesome. Yes, keep on putting some of the questions in the chat box. Candice, you can answer them if you can, but we can also answer them at the end. Carlene, over to you. I hope your internet is stable.
I cannot start my video at the moment. It says it's disabled. Annemarie, are you able to Oh, there we go. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Annemarie, and yeah, and everyone else. So my story is very different, and it's not I'm not going to present you with any data. I'm just going to briefly tell you my personal story. So actually, I am an occupational therapist myself, but in my case, for the biggest part of my career, I have been practicing in pediatric occupational therapy practices, very busy practices, hands-on therapy, doing sensory integration, air sensory integration work with kids. So very much hands-on, back-to-back sessions. Yeah, very busy, very full on. And then I reached a point in my life where my life was really turned upside down in 2023 when my marriage came to an end, and it really turned my life upside down. I have two young children, and all of a sudden I was faced with all the realities of going through the horrible thing that a divorce is, and single parenting, which, my goodness, I used to say I take off my hat to single parents, but now I do it even more. So I realized I had to adjust many things in my life with this huge change. Um, I I had to make changes that were more sustainable for me. I wasn't able to do everything on my own the way I was doing it. I wasn't coping. It was just too much. And to be able to work those back-to-back sessions and do all the other things, just I wasn't able to do it anymore. I felt it was a big crisis moment in my life. So I really started reevaluating everything in my life, my work, my private life, my everything. I reevaluated, and I had to see what, number one, I had to earn a better living. I realized that my my income wasn't good enough as for a single parent life. I had to improve my income. I had to really do what I enjoy, and I had to do what I had capacity for. And after really working through this process for a long time, figuring out what this was, um, I I realized I knew that I wanted to do something in the lines of working with sensory regulation and working with adults. And I love empowering and equipping people. And I had this whole idea of what I wanted to do. And one day I had the realization that, of course, someone is already doing this. And I remembered Annemarie's course. Well, actually, I remembered her book. And then I went to her website and I started looking at, but what is she already doing? And I found this course, the practitioner's course. And I realized that this might be the thing that I need, the tool that I need to go to where I am in chaos and not knowing what to do next to where I want to be. So, at that point, actually, I really wasn't able to afford the course. I was in, I was in a situation where I truly couldn't afford it. So I had a long discussion with Annemarie, and after that chat, I just knew this, I've got to do this. I just have to find the money somewhere. And my 40th birthday was coming up, and I decided, well, I'm going to let my friends know instead of giving me gifts for my 40th birthday, please help me get to this course. So my friends all contributed. Like Annemarie says, this was like crowdfunding for my course. And that was my 40th birthday gift. That's how I was able to actually attend the course. Okay, then I would say my major wins. Um, the first one is just personally how I was able to identify what I needed to change to make my lifestyle more sustainable as a single parent and what I had to change as a practitioner. Um, in the type of clients that I see, when I see them, like how I structure my day, everything, like I just started changing everything in my life to be able to cope better. And not be so overwhelmed. And I'm sensory sensitive generally as well. So things do tend to overwhelm me more quickly than others. So I had to make all these changes, and this course truly helped me personally first before I realized, well, this made such a huge impact in my life. I have to convey this message to my clients. And then out of that, it actually opened up a door to business, which I never thought would be the way that I would go. And I created a 6-week online course for healthy adults, but to prevent burnout, to improve their mental health, to decrease overwhelm, like all the things that it did for me, I now want to pass it on to other adults, just normal healthy adults like me. And they don't need to be anything professional, just any mom who's struggling. Yeah, so there we go. That was the other amazing thing that came out of attending this course, being equipped professionally to be able to do it in a professional way as an OT and use this knowledge and this tool and this amazing sensory matrix with my clients now. So yeah, those are my personal and professional wins all in one.
Thank you so much, Carleen. I still love hearing your story. Our course always come with a bit of a disclaimer. Be prepared to be challenged and to be challenged out of your comfort zone, but it's usually into a different comfort zone. So that's always such a nice story. Thank you, Carleen, for sharing that. And then, Carleen, you can just maybe unmute or put your video off. And then Renette, thank you for sharing. Renette is a client of mine or an ex-client of mine. So Renette, you can share a little bit the journey that you've done with our work. So Candace is actually sharing her own practice story. Carlene has her own personal one, but Renette can tell you how she got involved in our work and then share a little bit from a corporate perspective. Thanks, Renette.
Thanks, Annemarie, and thank you for the opportunity. Annemarie and I have known each other for many, many years, even from my previous jobs that I had. And the previous role that I was in, I was heading up HR for a very big energy organization, Vivo Energy. And I think those of you that have followed the news in 2024 would have seen that Vivo Energy, who is an energy business across Africa, have merged with Engie in South Africa. And everyone is now part of the Vivo Energy group. And I was heading up HR for the group. So my journey with Anna-Marie and the team started for my Vivo Energy team in July 2024. So we announced the merger in May 2024. And I was looking for an approach to be able to help my team. We were looking after HR for the group. So obviously we had to help to drive the whole merger and the integration of the teams, etc. But first and foremost, it was important for me that we as a team are well grounded and that we can help to drive the growth agenda for the organization. But making sure, and Maria, I remember I still asked you that, making sure that the team is resilient enough to be able to grow through this change, making sure that the team is strong enough together to support one another, because there will be times where it will be very difficult, and also making sure that the team was stable enough, and that we knew that we could help each other through this change. So we had our session with, we did the analysis and the assessment of the central intelligence. We had our session with Anna-Marie in July, where as a team, we then got to know each other better. Although we've worked well and we've worked a long time together, you still don't really know your colleagues in that much depth. So I think we all started to know ourselves better from a sensory perspective, whether we are leaf, trunks and roots. And guess what? I had more leaves in my team than what I had roots and trunks. So that for me was an eye-opener as well. And being able to then understand how are we going to help each other through this journey of change and the integration. And that involved something as practical as moving offices. So we had two separate office setups, the Engie South Africa one and the Vivo Energy South Africa, and we had to bring the teams together. And the Vivo Energy team, which was a lot smaller, about 75 people, had to move into Engine Court in Cape Town. Lovely building, very nice to be able to work there, but it's disruption. And given that the team had much more of a smaller business and company mindset, it was quite stressful for the team to move. And understanding our sensory nuances, what makes us tick, what impacts us, helped myself and Anna-Marie also to determine how we're going to set up the team in that office space, and making sure that the roots are much more further removed in a corner where they can focus and where they won't be disturbed, and the leaves can be in the middle of all the noise and it won't really bother them. Then also, when we did the actual change, we had what we called Viva Vibes, where there were specific messages that we sent to the team every morning to be able just to make sure that they focus on the positive element of going through the change. And again, giving them sensory snacks that they understand that they have to look after themselves, and they have to understand that this will be disruptive, and they have to realize what the impact is for them and how they're going to handle that. Then towards the end of 24, beginning 25, we merged. I had 18 additional team members that joined. And immediately at that point, what we did is we took those individuals through the same process, and we had a follow-up session where we brought that team together. And it really helped to fast track the integration of the team, breaking down the barriers, people starting to communicate a lot better, and opening up the dialogue for the two teams that are now one to work together. Additional to that, we've set up an internal team that worked with Anna-Marie and the team for a few months, and started to drive this within our internal team, making sure that there were activities that helped to look after our sensory elements, and again making sure that we just take people, like for a Friday morning at 11 o'clock, those that want to go and take a walk, just go and take a walk, go out of the office for half an hour. And we had a puzzle that people built. So we brought some additional sensory snacks in that helped different people to be able just to de-stress, and to be able to make sure that they get that sensory input whilst being in a very stressful environment, changing high pressure to be able to deliver, etc. For me, sitting in the leadership position, it really helped. Firstly, to get to know myself better, and for the team to get to know me better, to understand what works and what doesn't work. Secondly, I think it helped me to understand the team better. So besides them getting to know themselves better, I realized and I started to understand where I need to change the way that I communicate or the way that I engage with them. To give you a practical example, one of the leads that was in my team that's not reporting directly to me used to give me data on a regular basis. And I'm one of those people, I'm a trunk. I get the information, I received it, I get on and I use it. He needs feedback to actually say, well, you know what? Job well done. I've received it. It's good. I didn't do that. And when we had the session, that's one of the things that he highlighted to me. It's something simple to do, but if you're in a high pressure environment, you sort of just get on with the job and he delivered it and I use it. Another example is one of my leads that I knew who's very, very quick on behaving, quick on giving me the data, whatever I need. I knew I just had to check before he sends the email to make sure that the nuances are correct, because it's a case of, I'm going to get it done, I'm going to get it out, let's move on. Then I knew if I work with one of my routes, when I get the information, dotting the I's and crossing the T's has already happened, so I can just use it as is and I can share the information. So it really helps with the dialogue with your team. It helps to understand your team better. And I think for the team in themselves, it helped to communicate better with one another. It helped them to integrate better. It helped them to look at different ways of working, given that they understood each other better. And it helped to reduce friction also. And overall, it helped the team to perform better. So from where I'm sitting, this is an initiative and a process that I would recommend any team to do. I would recommend any organization to do. Even if you're a team that's worked together for a long time, because it brings a very different nuance than a lot of the other assessment tools that are out there. And it really helps us as team members to understand each other better, and it breaks down a lot of those barriers. So from a well-being perspective, building better relationships and then also increasing productivity, I could definitely see it had a very positive impact on the team. And the team's feedback was also, it's one of the best sessions ever that they have attended. So I'll just say thank you, Anna-Marie.
Thank you, Renette. I still laugh when we were Renette and I were checking in and say, I got an email from so and so who's a leaf, and believe it, in the email it says find my attachment, and of course there wasn't an attachment to that email. I remember we joked about that. Thanks. I think
Yes.
it's a really nice way. Thanks, Renette. It was actually lovely to work with your team, and also I think Renette was also, from that business point of view, there was a lot of time and commitment into also continuing with the process. If we work with corporate teams, I hate to just go in for one session and then move out again. So if we have the capacity and the time to actually extend the value, then you can look at how do we use that team to understand themselves, understand the teamwork, team relationship, but you can also tap into well-being, reducing stress and burnout, and then also work with performance and productivity. So thanks for sharing that. That was really, really awesome. I really like, because sharing it from you guys that has had the experiences is obviously a lot more powerful than me just sharing, what we do from a business point of view. I think we can probably now go into, let me just see, before we go into questions, let me just look. So if you're thinking, how do I learn this? How do I apply this properly? And then just going back to application, there are quite a lot of applications for this. Again, just for those of you, a reminder, there's a lot of therapists who use this in mental health, in clinical practice, return to work. When you work with neurodiversity, it's a great application tool for that. Any depression and anxieties. There's also a lot of therapists who actually use it in an in-hospital capacity, as well as mental health, out of hospital work, and then obviously return to work. I love Carlene's story because that's the personal gain. Also, my life has changed as a result of knowing this. So obviously there's a lot of just people individually that find they understand themselves better and they choose better activities and habits for themselves. And then the other element is where we work with businesses or corporate teams. We can also do one-to-one century coaching which we often then use our practitioners to do that. Us as a core team only work with, teams in general. The other that I'm just going to leave you with as well, there's a lot of shifts in the inclusive design world. Where are we designing workspaces so that they are not only sensory informed, but also sensory inclusive? Renette hinted on that when they were moving back into the office. How did they use the sensory matrix results to position people differently from a seating point of view? It's quite profound, yet quite simple to apply. So how do I apply this? How do I integrate this into my current work? So I'm just going to share two things with you. And those of you who know me quite well will know I've got this thing with evidence-based and case studies. And tonight's session is the first of a series of other sessions where we will be looking at case studies and evidence base. And I will be writing up these case studies for publication purposes because I think there's so much phenomenal work that's being done by so many people in this space, and we're not really writing up the evidence base. So I'm going to do that. That's just briefly what we're going to look at. This will be on our website. If you wanted to join any of the other sessions, again, it's going to be free, and we're going to continue to share case studies and best practice and evidence-based. And then for those of you, if you wanted to move and do our practitioners course, our next one is starting the 1st of March. It's a 3-month online course. We only run them twice a year for a small exclusive group. It is 3 months of blended learning. We look at the neuroscience in a lot of detail, the tools, case study application. So it is about expanding your toolbox. It is accredited through the University of Stellenbosch. I think you get, and I'm going to get it wrong, 30 CPD points. And there's also ICF accredited for people who are in the coaching profession. It is designed for professionals, this course in particular, and we really drive a very strong community. So that is the one part about this that I love. We in-depth work through an immersive learning experience with people throughout the course, but then afterwards we invite people to actually become part of our community, and we keep on learning and supporting each other. Okay, so Candice, that's question and answers. Maybe if you wanted to unmute Candice and maybe just share if there were any questions in the chat box or anything that we need to cover. I didn't check the chat box, obviously.
So just the one that has just come up is if people can't make it to the March date, when is the later date that this course will be on?
The later date is, I think, August, September, and October. There are versions that you can go on self-directed and not go through the live session, but you won't get the full benefit out of the course. But the next series will start September, October, November. It is online because it is a global course. We run it over different time zones because we do have people from all across the world who join into the course. I think we've trained nearly 600 people all across the globe. And as I say, we form quite a strong community of practitioners who's gone through that process. It's not open for anyone. You have to have background in either, some or other health or behavior type of certification. And then obviously you are really, really welcome to join the course, yeah. So the next one is September, October, November. Other questions, Candice?
One was actually who can join it if you do have to be an OT or not. But I think you've
Yeah. So
answered that.
I just want to elaborate on that. I am an OT, yes, and it has been designed out of that world. I started doing this course in 2012, but it particularly is non-exclusive. So we really do open it up to other professionals as well, as long as you've got a solid background working with people. We can't just train anyone off from the street because it is a tool that we provide and we give it in your hand, and you are actually going to then implement that with your particular clients. But I've had, for instance, a CA that has done it years ago, but he begged me and he did it for himself. But as I say, so we usually stick with a professional person, but therapists, coaches, psychologists, social workers, physiotherapists. We've got workplace designers who also do the course, and then obviously a lot of the coaching practitioners as well. Candice, over to you.
One question that was early on was just how would somebody refer to the group if For example, they don't want to do the practitioner's course, but they would like to have their clients access the sensory
Absolutely.
matrix.
That's a really good question. So there's two things. Anyone can buy the Century Matrix on our website. You can literally, it's all automated. You can go through the process, purchase it, and you will get your report. But then if there's any person who wants a coaching session, or if there's anyone who, for instance, contact us who might have a mental health problem, say someone with depression or anxiety or neurodiversity, then all of our licensed practitioners are listed on our website. So you can even contact them through our website, but often people will contact us and say, I'm based here or I'm based there. I want a face-to-face session, or it's okay for me to have an online session. And then we are the connection point for individual people to connect them with our group of practitioners. Then there's also a group of our practitioners that deliver together with us on corporate team programs. So, we can actually widen that contribution. So you don't need to do it yourself. You can then refer clients or teams to us, and then we will make sure that we do the matches as best as possible.
Perfect. Just, I think, two more that are on my heart. One, just to clarify, on completion of training, will the individuals be able to work with individuals as well as groups, or just one? So I haven't
That's a
answered it.
that's a really good question. I think it's going to depend on your interest and your experience. You can definitely work one-to-one. If you don't have experience or much experience in either, I would definitely recommend that you start working one-to-one. For years and years and years and years, I did single century matrices with people, and then obviously went through the nuances and the detail and the discussions. And that's how I actually build up my bank of knowledge. And then from there on, I've translated that back into groups. However, you could be in learning and development or work with groups to start off with, then you can implement it in groups, but it does help to work with people independently and individually first, because as I say, you've got more opportunity to go through the client-centric stories. What does it work like for them? And then we unpack and go into a lot more detail. So the nuances gets really absorbed in one-to-one work. In groups, it's really fun. The dynamics is slightly different. So the more in-depth is often with your one-to-one work. Yeah, that's a good question. Candice?
Just a transition from PEDS SI to a sensory practitioner, and the need for mental health backing.
Okay, I hope I've got the question right. Look, I transitioned. I was in pediatrics working with children, and I worked overseas. I was doing a lot of travel. I came back and I was just unsettled. I just couldn't find myself back into clinical practice. And I stepped out of clinical practice into actually working with parents and teachers. So that was my first entry point. It was hard. And I did a lot of learning. Oh boy, and I made a lot of mistakes. So, this is why this course I think is so close to my heart. Everything that I've learned over a period of more than about 30 years, oh gosh, I'm giving my age away, I've actually put into this course. So I think a pediatric therapist going into adults is probably a little bit harder. I find mental health therapists absorbing into the sensory framework, it's a little bit easier. But needless to say, it's not impossible. I would, however, suggest if you're in pediatrics and you want to have a different trajectory and you want to work with adults in mental health, don't do it alone, because your client is probably going to need a whole team. Make sure then you become involved and you work with other mental health practitioners. Mental health work, and I'm just talking from my old experience, got quite messy. It's quite complicated. I think it's not ideal as a single therapist working on your own to work in the mental health space with clients. You can do health promotion or you can do wellness. That's easy. That's very easy. But as soon as you work with a diagnosis, I think there's a lot of other considerations that needs to happen. And it would be better for you from a reputational point of view and for your client to work as part of a collective team. But I'm sure that's doable. No, I'm sure that's doable. And believe it or not, we actually put a masterclass together, how to transition from practice into business. I had to do that, and again, made many mistakes and learned a lot of things the hard ways, and am still learning, by the way. And we also share with that how can we help people to make that transition. If people have done our course and they've gone through the investment of learning this concept, we actually do spend a lot of time with our practitioners to get them converted. I see Amanda Oosthuizen is on the call. Amanda, I'm going to use you as an example. Amanda did our course, and from the learning, she actually designed a whole business around sensory wellness. Amanda, we're very proud of you, and we helped her also with that quite a lot. So we are really there to form community with you and to guide you through the process. I believe we've got a phenomenal contribution that we can make, and there's not enough people doing it. So it's part of my mission to make sure that this information, firstly, get evidence-based written up, but that we share it with more people. And I mean, we need people to go through the training and to actually get competent in the theory, the science, and the application. And there's lots of application in a different way than just normal peach practice or normal mental health. Candice, other questions?
To simplify a question, the question was, can you give a couple of practical examples on strategies and tools you use to ease off sensorial overload? So instead, I'm going to ask Anna-Marie, what would you use for yourself if you're feeling overloaded? What do you use for yourself?
Okay, so obviously I would get my shoes on and I would go for a run. So I am a runner, so that really does help for me to get out. But I often struggle more from sensory underload than sensory overload. I'm going to give you an example. This is my jiggle. I don't know if you can hear it. This is a bracelet that makes a noise. And I particularly choose it because I work from home isolated. So it is my noise background so that I don't feel as alone. I know it sounds weird, but this is my sensory strategy. But to give you a simple example, the other day I did a call with someone, got a PhD in industrial psychology. We were exchanging tools. I did a leadership assessment and he did the sensory matrix assessment. We were on the call and he was like, I'm really struggling to focus. There's too many visual notifications running over my screen. And I said, look at your score. You've got a -5 for visual, meaning you are sensitive to visual information. You should actually disable your visual notifications. And he looked at me and he said, what? I never thought about that. So, those are some of the really simple and easy strategies that we would apply. And Renette, one of the BAT HR managers that we worked with years ago, we did a session with them and I followed him up quite a few years afterwards. And he said, Anna-Marie, I did two things after your session. I put my phone on mute and I built in 15 minutes between my meetings, and my life has changed as a result. So the stuff that we do is practical. We call, and it's around sensory snacks. What are the quick things that you can do to keep yourself regulated? It could be a glass of water. It could be a stress ball. It could be doodling. It could even be twirling your hair. How do we naturally self-regulate? Sensory diets, like when I go for a run, that keeps me sane. And I'm struggling at the moment because I've got a knee injury, so I can't run enough. Or sensory ergonomics, how do I change our environment? For instance, this is a sensory snack for me, by the way. Sensory ergonomics is changing my environment. I'm now working once a week at workshop 17 because I'm dying at home. I can't work by myself. But so these are the three categories that we provide: simple, easy, practical strategies that stick because it really resonates so well and easily aligned with people's thresholds. Hopefully that makes sense.
Perfect.
Candice, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there are so many strategies, and for me, it really is an individual choice about what do you need and how you need it. And that's what I love about it. When you can go through a report with a client and choose specifically what is going to impact their life from a very practical basis.
Yeah, I think just on that note, it was very interesting. There's a lot of therapists who use the sensory matrix in an acute clinical setting. It is people with depression and anxiety admissions. It was very interesting for me. I didn't expect it at the time, but this psychiatrist was saying they like the fact that it's so simple. People can implement those strategies straight away. It's not cognitive. It's not in your head. It's actually in your body. So it's all bottom-up self-regulation that we apply. All right, we've got 2 more minutes. Candice, is there any other final question, final comment?
Someone just said, have you found COVID lockdown period had an impact on the way people were dealing with sensory stimulation?
It was definitely right thereafter. I think COVID, everyone got a little bit, more sensitive. So moving out of lockdown, going back into the world, a lot of people struggled with that. We still have clients who say, "I wish we could go back to lockdown because I loved lockdown." And even post COVID and lockdown, we actually design a supplementary tool where we help people to just match you with the best work environment, which we position in the sensory inclusive design space. So yeah, definitely. Remember the brain, neuroplasticity, use it or lose it. If we stop using our brains, it becomes more sensitive. So yes, during lockdown, people actually became, and people who were already sensitive became more sensitive. And maybe people who were not that sensitive, but a little bit became, dip a little bit lower into those frameworks. But then we do recover. So the brain is a wonderful thing. We can actually recover, we can stimulate, and we can use neuroplasticity to still manage that. So we're always pushing the brain a little bit to not be too comfortable, but never to the detriment of sensory overload. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Candace?
And I think just the last one about the sensory report, somebody said, is the sensory information on the sensory matrix assessment and report?
Yes. So what happens if you complete 120 questions, and then you will actually get customized strategies based on your results, and all of them are listed on the report. The report is 26 pages long, to the detriment of some of the marketing people say it's too long. We are trying to shorten it a little bit, but it's filled and filled and filled with really, really practical applications and practical strategies for sure. Okay. And I think that's all that we have time for right on the dot. Candace, thank you so much for helping and your support. Kathleen, thanks for sharing your story again. I always love listening to it, how you crowdfunded doing our course. Renette, it was wonderful to work with your teams. Thank you so much for sharing that. Kirby, thank you for working so diligently in the background with the event. Kirby was very excited.
Anna Marie,
and
will you
sometimes very
please
stressed.
remember to share if people sign up in the next 24 hours?
Oh, that's true. Kobe would have reminded me. So what we can do, if you do sign up within the next 24 hours, we will give you a Century Matrix for free. It is valued at $65, equals around 1,200 Rand. So if you do sign up, we are very happy to give you a one for free. And I think there was also, for the first few people who signed up and who attended, you will also get one for free. So remember, they can be used with your clients. So it's just a freebie from us to thank you for your attendance. And we hope to see some of you joining our course. Thank you so much for being here. Have a lovely evening further, and we'll speak to you soon. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.